as a concept, enlightenment would be the realization of a harmony of the whole universe.
All right, Michael, great to see you. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Good to be here with you, Tanuka.
For sure. Okay, everyone. So today we have Michael McCord with us. He's the director of the Beginner's Mind Temple at the San Francisco Zen Center. Before that, he was a manager at Citibank, helped to launch an ISP in India, did vocational training for people with disabilities, and a whole bunch of stuff that I'm sure we'll be able to get into. But Michael, I guess in addition to that, do you want to just talk a little bit about yourself, who you are, kind of what you're doing at the San Francisco Zen Center right now, and just some of the things that have been on your mind lately?
Yeah. Well, we're here in the middle of the pandemic, of course, as everybody else is, but we have a congregate living facility where we're living communally in the middle of Hayes Valley here in San Francisco. So we have individuals from age 20 to age 80. We have individuals who are high risk, and I'm the director of the center, which is a Soto Zen temple that has a schedule that starts in the morning at 5:30 with meditation, and we have a formal kind of temple practice. While at the same time during the day we have our daily work and keeping the temple open and raising money and selling goods in the bookstore and maintaining a website and a whole bunch of different things like that, as well as doing online programs and classes and that sort of thing. So my job is to be the director of the one of the three temples that make up San Francisco Zen Center, and that's the Beginner's Mind Temple here at City Center. And I've been here in this role for about a year and a half, and I try to, during this pandemic, find ways for us to stay safe as a community. So I also am on a committee with a few medical doctors that reviews our practices here in regard to social distancing and how we get food and how we wear masks and how we watch the masks and all that sort of thing. While at the same time trying to bring in people and teach them how to practice Soto Zen. So that's a little bit about what's going on for me right now.
Right. So, what's it been like to still maintain a meditation practice and keep focused on that while, especially, I guess now we're getting more towards the point where the vaccine's coming and all that kind of stuff. But what was it like to maintain those responsibilities, especially in a Zen context, and then also have the pandemic unfolding around you?
Yeah, I think that um, the sense of isolation that you have when you're sitting all by yourself, either in your room or in a meditation hall or on a mountaintop, is trying to get to a place where you get comfortable with just what's happening for you and what's happening with your body and your mind and those sensations that come up, and to really practice a acceptance practice to learn how to sit in the middle of all of the things that are going on for you. And very similarly, that's what the world has been going through. We've had our own little cocoon. People have their apartment or their house. Oftentimes, they're way more isolated than before, and they're surrounded by things that have gotten, I guess you'd say, in some ways, much smaller. And I think for us, it's been great to see how our practice translates to something that asks us to be more isolated. We've had to use technology to put all of our ceremonies and daily meditation practices online, and so we Zoom, meditation practice, and it's been kind of generating a whole new culture around how do we actually have a vibrant practice in the middle of a pandemic. We have a large four-story, 47-room building in the middle of San Francisco, and we largely don't have to go out of the building. We have food delivered, and we've got a nice courtyard and a rooftop, and some exercise equipment and a rowing machine, and we have a full functioning kitchen, and so yeah, we've largely stayed in the building and ventured out for walks to the park and that sort of thing. But by and large, we've just been with each other for months and months. And I think that that's shown us a lot about our individual practices, and it's also helped us create new ways to exist, figuring out how to do, in some cases, some fairly elaborate ceremonies with two or three cameras and some interactive, where's this camera positioned where people can see this person bow, and then this person needs to ask a question, and then that person needs to offer incense. And it's kind of like starting to learn how to be a movie producer and a Zen priest, and I think that's been a very unique situation. But it's helped us learn how to actually reach a broader audience. And we recently did an intensive that had nearly 300 people taking part, people in Germany and Ireland and Australia and Japan and California, all real time. Some people at 11 o'clock at night, and other people at 2 in the afternoon, practicing together and taking classes together and doing Q&A with the teacher. So I think that it's helped us actually expand who we can offer the Dharma to, if you will, just based upon having to be forced into learning how to do it. And we have more people than ever that sit with us every single morning. So now the question is, what happens when we go back to having to take care of the physical zendo and the physical sitting space, because we don't have a whole other separate Zen center that can run two Zen centers. So we're going to have to do some figuring out.
So I think one of the things I definitely wanted to chat with you about today was just kind of Zen in the modern day. I guess applied to people's personal lives, but also one of the interesting things we talked about is the applications of Zen thinking in business in the workplace. So I want to get into that, but before that, I've known Michael for a little over a year since I met you at the San Francisco Zen Center. We've talked about a lot of things, but one of the things that I was pretty curious to actually dig into on this podcast specifically is how you got here. So your life before Zen, how you came to it. Do you want to share a little bit about your backstory and kind of how you became a Zen priest?
Sure. I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but yeah, it was not a plan, that's for sure. Originally, I went to school and got a degree in theology with a desire to be a Christian minister. And in near the end of that degree, I spent a year in the Middle East, working as a volunteer on a project for the Jordanian royal family. I worked for Princess Princess Sarvat, who was the patron of the mentally handicapped in Jordan, and on a project to help do vocational training. And I think that it changed a lot of how I viewed the world. I think I had a very fairly narrow conservative view of the world, and everything was kind of black and white. And I learned a good deal about Islam and learned some Arabic and got immersed in another culture. And I think it broadened for me the questions about ethics and morality and just my own view of the world. And from that, I stopped actually going down the path that I went down, and didn't want to be a Christian minister and felt kind of disillusioned in some way. And I had to learn how to support myself. So through, I guess you'd say, a lot of effort and just scrappiness, I learned how to make my way in the tech field, and a lot of self-taught efforts, and really kind of put the whole religion thing on a back burner. And I did a startup in India, like you mentioned, and it was really bad timing when the first tech bubble burst in 2000. And then I started over again in the finance field and worked for Citibank for a number of years, and eventually was a manager, and did a lot of things in the financial field for Citibank here in San Francisco and for the western half of the country. And when the tech bubble or the financial bubble was bursting in 2008, I took the opportunity to be paid to leave and um, really was looking for what was going to happen next. And the last year I was working with Citibank, I was doing a lot of meditating at the Zen Center and was really getting into that. But I didn't really want to join another organized religion and didn't have any desire to go down that path. But I got really intrigued by their concept of meditation, zazen, especially the concept of shikantaza, just sitting, which is a little different than a lot of, one-pointed focus meditation on breath or mantra or something like that. And I decided to move into the Zen Center for 3 months in San Francisco and just go deep. And then I found out about Tassajara, where it's kind of off the grid, down south of here near Carmel, in the mountains. And I thought, well, I'll go down there for 3 months and I'll just really immerse myself in that. And I stayed there for 6 years and really came to see that this is kind of what I wanted to do with my life. And in the course of those 6 years, I actually ordained as a Zen priest. And I began to see that there was a lot of things in that practice that were so practical and relevant to the life I had before in finance and technology. And my teacher, Ryushin Paul Haller, he was born in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, and went through the troubles in the 60s and 70s with all of the Protestant and Catholic bombings and shootings and strife. And he had kind of fell out with the Catholic Church, if you will, in the early 70s and was looking for something else. And he basically came back around to Christianity and seeing how that you didn't necessarily need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And he helped me, I think, resurrect an original intention and desire to be of service, but to do it in a different, maybe, context of Buddhism. And it kind of helped me, I guess you'd say, have more respect for my degree and for what I did originally through, I think I should say, identifying with his path and with some of the, integrated workshops that he taught with other, rabbis or Catholic priests or that sort of thing. But there's a lot of, I think I should say, detail to that story, but that's the maybe five minute synopsis of it.
Yeah. So between the time that you came back from Jordan and you felt like you didn't want to walk down, I guess, like an active Christian faith path, and when you discovered Zen, what changed during that period? And so did you just not think about religion too much for that period, or what was that
Um,
transition like?
yeah, well, I mean, I think for the first couple of years, it was really just dealing with a loss of culture, kind of a death of culture. Everything that I had done up till that point, my mid 20s, was really immersed in trying to become a Christian minister. So, the college I went to, all the stuff I was doing in high school, the people I dated, my mentors, even my basketball coaches, these were all people that were really connected to this church and religion. So when I came out of that, it really was like a mourning. It was like a death of a culture. I had to really kind of rebuild my life and all of my touchstones because it wasn't just like I decided, oh, that would be a neat college to go to. I'll do that. It was something that I'd been in since I was born, and yeah, how to kind of build a life in a different culture, if you will, was it was daunting. So I felt like I wandered a lot. I did a lot of exploring, partying, experimenting. Who am I? What are my boundaries? What are my morals? For a number of years, and interestingly, I found myself in Seattle in 2000 after the tech bubble burst, after the company in India stopped starting up, and really unemployed on purpose. And I shaved my head, I grew a mustache and goatee, And I wrote and read poetry on the writing circuit in Seattle for a number of months, maybe about a year. The open mic nights where all the poets would get together in like a really big coffee shop, and like 40 people would read like their works. And you'd stay up till 2 in the morning, and then you'd go out and drink coffee and debate everything. And I did that for a period of time. And one of my friends that was in that circle also was a product manager at Microsoft, and she invited me to their company party, and so we went there on Lake Washington to this big company party, and they no expenses was spared, and they brought in this world famous fortune teller, and there was like this big tent, and she was like, "We should go and see the fortune teller," and I was just like, "Oh, I don't believe in any of that stuff," and she's like, "No, it'd be fun." So we did. We went and we went to the fortune teller, and she was the kind that like read your poem. So she looks at my poem for a minute, and then she says, "You used to be on a spiritual path, and it was very strong, and you really felt like you were into it, but something happened, and there was a crossroads, and you're not on a spiritual path anymore, and there's something now. You're at another crossroads, and you can either go back to a spiritual path, and if you do, you will build an oak tree that children can like swing off of. But if you don't, you'll make a lot of money, but your life will be empty." So within a year, I got into building a career in finance. And, there were things that would come out that would happen here and there where I would, think about it, but then I would just kind of push it away. And I think it was hard enough to come out of that culture and to build another life, and I just didn't want to really consider it. But I think what happened with Citibank was I was originally recruited by someone that I really didn't have any desire to get into banking, but this I was doing a contract in Seattle for City Mortgage, and they had a financial crisis, or I mean a managerial crisis, and so the manager for San Francisco was flying up there and spending 2 days a week in Seattle managing that area. And I got to know that manager, and just the way he managed people, I thought was brilliant. And he got a lot out of people, but he also was really warm and just really supportive. He was just a superb manager. And I basically joined Citibank to learn from him. I wanted to work with him, and he offered me the job to be his right-hand person in San Francisco. And so that's the whole reason I even got into it, was that. But fast forward 5 years, and now I have his job, and I'm managing the Bay Area for retail lending for Citibank, and I'm making good money and driving a nice car and have a nice condo and have a nice life in San Francisco. And all the people that I really enjoyed working with now are my competitors, because they've been offered really good jobs at Bank of America and at Chase and all the rest of it. And now it's just a job, and now it's just, and I could just kind of see my future. It was like, I'm just going to keep making a lot of money and having nice things, but I really don't like this. And this is really, 60-hour days, and surrounded by people that really want to make a lot of money as the primary goal in their life. And it just felt really empty. And when the financial crisis hit, I actually was the integration manager for the West. So what that means is I was the person for the western half of the country for Citi Group that basically looked at Smith Barney, Citi Mortgage, and Citibank, and tried to find the opportunities that existed between the three different customer bases, and then to build tools around that for selling. And I heard that job was going to be eliminated, and about 6 months before basically it was like in June of '07, there was like, these jobs are going to be eliminated, and there was opportunities to, move into other positions and apply for other jobs, and I just didn't have the energy to do it. And I was like, maybe they'll just eliminate my job and pay me to leave. And in January of '08, that's what happened. And I was already volunteering at Zen Center, and I just basically went from volunteering 5 hours a week to volunteering about 30 hours a week. And that's kind of how the transition happened.
how did you first discover the Zen Center to start volunteering in the first place?
A friend of a friend heard me talking about wanting to learn how to, on with a group of people like years before. I had done some like guided meditation where everyone would like get together and somebody who knew how to like guide a meditation, and I found it kind of comforting and calming. But I really didn't know anything about meditation. And a friend of a friend just socially one time said that he was going to the Zen Center and learning to meditate, and that he thought that it was really interesting with what they were doing there. And I just said to him, "Well, the next time you go, ring me up. I'd like to check that out." And I didn't even think about it. And then one day, like a week later, he rung me up and was just like, "I'm heading to the Zen Center." And so I went with him, and they introduced us to. It was a time where they did like the zazen instruction, and zazen being sitting Zen or meditative Zen, zazen sitting Zen, and I found this concept Shikantaza of just sitting, where you sit and whatever comes up, you don't push it away, but you don't hold on to it. You don't add anything to it. You don't have a narrative about it. You don't analyze it. You just sit in the middle of the phenomena of your body and your mind. And it was really hard. It was like finding the machine in the gym that you're the worst at, you know. And but when I went away, I was just I felt totally distracted. I felt like I was sitting there just analyzing myself, analyzing, and really critical. And then I walked out afterward, and I felt like this deep compulsion to like do it again. Kind of like I found the machine in the gym. That if I work on this machine, this is like the muscle group that is keeping all the other muscles from working together, kind of thing, you know. And so I went back like, once or twice a week for, a couple of years, and I took a class, Intro to Buddhism, or Intro to Zen, I think it was, and did some volunteering in the bookstore, in the kitchen, and then when, I was laid off from Citibank, I already kind of had a foundation and people I knew, and I already had a daily sitting practice, and I just decided to go deeper.
So after the period where you were volunteering more intensely, then you started residing there for the actual commitment to become an ordained Zen priest. What was that decision point like? And also, like, what did your family think about it? What did your friends think about it? How did you think about it relative to like everything that you'd been doing before that? What was that
Yeah.
time in your like in your life like?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, just walking through mist, and then eventually you realize you're soaked, you really don't notice it while it's happening. And when I first came here, it was basically a surface level self-help program. I wanted to learn how to calm my mind and focus better, and that was pretty much it. And I think that over time I realized it was actually a way of life, and it was a way of life that was intricately connected to everyone else and the planet. And so I came here, started sitting. I was living at City Center in the city, urban temple, and then I found out about the remote mountain monastery where things are, the schedule is much more intense. You're getting up at 3:50 in the morning, and there's, in many cases, anywhere from 4 to 8 hours of meditation during the day, depending on the type of, time of year it is, and living in a cabin, without heat, without electricity. You don't have any keys, you don't have any internet, you don't have a phone. Just that was I was like, that sounds, the kind of the ambitious side of me. I was kind of like, that's where the real monks go. I'm gonna go off the grid, and I'm gonna be a fierce monk. And so I think part of that was a little egotistical and a little competitive, if you will, as far as initial motives. But you can't criticize your motives. You have a good intention, and you have to see where it goes, and it's honest. I think after a few years at Tassajara, things were really starting to unfold for me, and I realized how useful this practice was for an everyday life, and it was just so practical, and it addressed some things at a very practical level that I had never really been able to put my finger on in modern life. For instance, why things come up the way they come up. I mean, I've been taught, well, if you get angry, here's all these things you can do. You can count to 10, or you can distract your mind, or you can, whatever. Or if you get anxious, there's things you can do. But what actually addresses the root thing of why I got angry or anxious in the first place? And not just in my head, but like just the body sensation of somebody did something and then I have this reaction to it. And noticing those things starting to morph through this practice, that things would happen, and just being surprised that my body reaction and my psychic reaction, what's going on in my head reaction, where I go, is starting to be different and more livable. In a sense, if you really want to boil it down, I started noticing that it was much easier to be this person with this mind and this body in this moment. That it was just easier. It was just more livable. It was just more tolerable. And, it wasn't something you could necessarily describe, how you got from A to B, but you knew that the practice you were engaging in was the big contributor to that. And I think when that started happening, I started thinking about shifting from this is going to be something cool for me to take back and use in the tech field or the financial field, to something more along the lines of, wow, I want to teach other people about this and bring other people to understand how this could be useful in their modern life. That's when I started thinking about ordaining.
For the question of where does all of this stuff come from, I remember we had touched on this a little bit in one of our previous chats too, but and I know it might be too general of a question, but did you ever come to an answer on where all this stuff comes from, the origination of it, and your relationship with that?
Well, in general, I mean, I think that it comes from all the millions and billions of things that give us 1 second of consciousness. I mean, it's your physical biology, all the decisions you've made in your life, and the way that the rivers have formed in your brain in regard to habit patterns, things you inherited as far as ways your body, secretes adrenaline, things that have to do with your level of testosterone, the things that your great grandmother passed on to you from your DNA, what was happening in your life at formative times when your brain was being formed, when you were going through different emotional stages of development, what was happening in your home. I mean, all of these things that impact us on top of, our city, our state, and how other people view us, our birth order, and, all these things that are impactful. We're born as like this malleable piece of clay, and that all this stuff is happening to us every second, and we don't realize it. But we're just this open sponge when we're born, and we've inherited a certain set of things that are infinite, and then all this other stuff happens to us. And that eventually ends up being, um, the organism that we become. And we end up having all these narratives and all these stories about who I am and who my parents are and what my gender is and my place in society and my race and my ethnicity and my religion and my intellect and my physical ability. We get all these stories about ourselves, and we build them into ourselves inherently. And so if I've got a certain story that I've digested since I was 3 or whatever, that has to do with what being a male in America means, and that's a deep piece of my identity, and then someone does something and it's threatening to that identity, and then I have a body reaction to it, that's something that I come by honestly. And so I'm sitting in the middle of things that to trace their roots back to their origins is absolutely impossible. But to generally know that, I am a product of this universe and not detached from it. And I've inherited things physically and psychically that are way beyond my control. I can exhale a little bit and realize I come by it honestly and try not to go to war with it.
So you mentioned that one of the things you noticed after some years of Zen practice was that it felt easier to be this person with this mind in this moment. So even though you don't know how exactly that practice influenced a particular reaction or a particular behavior, do you have a sense for how you feel like that practice generally influenced that, or how it, or what it did to you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think at the root of it, it's an acceptance practice, and largely learning first in our meditative practice how to accept what's going on. So we call it the school of immovable sitting. And I'm sitting there and my nose itches, and then I don't scratch my nose. And I don't wish it away and think, I'm going to get back to the Zen stuff when my nose quits itching. And I don't, sit there and analyze it. How come I'm always so upset when my nose itches? I shouldn't be that way. It's just stepping completely out of language and being in pure acceptance. This is what's going on. That's it. This is what's going on. Because so often, we're at odds with what's happening and we aren't really accepting it. And it doesn't mean in life we don't take action. That's another time and place. It's just the fact that so much of the time we don't realize how much we aren't accepting. We aren't accepting another person. We aren't accepting, what's actually happening. And in so many cases in life, you can't change what's happening right now. What's happening is happening. And maybe you can make a small dent in it, or maybe you can walk away from it, or what have you. But you're in a conversation and the other person's saying stuff you don't think they should be saying. What are you going to do? And there's a way of holding what's happening in this moment that somehow or another increases the internal emotional reservoir, if you will, what you can hold. That emotional reservoir starts to expand through an acceptance practice. And so you notice that what bothers you just doesn't ruin your day for quite as long as it used to. You know, it's like when I always give the example about when you're 5 and you're eating an ice cream cone, or maybe you're 3 and you have an ice cream cone, and the ice cream falls off into a ditch, into a bunch of gravel, and it's ruined, and when that happens, your perspective, your emotional reservoir at 3 is so limited that, the whole world is over, and you'd push a button to end the world right then if you could, it's done. Your toys don't exist, your parents don't exist. It's just like the world is awful, and the only thing that exists is awfulness. And I love ice cream, and if I drop my ice cream cone now, I'm still bummed out. But it just doesn't overwhelm me the same way. It's the exact same thing. And so, through this practice, I come back in contact with, people that I know that have been difficult people in my life, and somehow or another, I can now think and talk to them at the same time, which I didn't used to be able to. Or, the difficult thing happens at work, and somehow or another, even though I might be unsettled by what's happening, the degree of unsettledness is just surrounded by other things, and the emotional reservoir to hold what's going on has somehow or another expanded. How it actually works, no one really knows, but this has been studied for about 2,000 years, that sitting in the midst of what's going on with pure acceptance, or at least the intention to, hones something inside that allows us to learn how to be in the middle of what's unfolding without having to look away from it or go to war with it, to actually be able to meet it. And that does something inside that is calming. There's something that happens through the acceptance practice and the daily, training that we do in the monastery that allows that, through the emotional reservoir expanding, through, this acceptance practice, there is a calming that takes place, and an inner calming. And what happens when we're calm? When we're calm, we learn better, we hear better, we're more curious, we're less afraid, and when we're calm, we can see better. The the storm on the lake quits happening, and all of a sudden the lake settles, and then it's like glass, and then you can see. You can see more clearly like what I should do next, what I should say next. How do I meet this moment? You know, the clarity starts to come through the calming. So that's in general how we've seen this practice unfold and manifest for people. But for each person, it's different. And the way that it manifests is different. And, that's a generalization of how it kind of unpacks for people. But the end result seems to be for each person that they are more comfortable in their own skin and better able to meet what's happening right now.
Throughout the process, did you have any did you grapple with like this idea of enlightenment and the way that factors into the practice? Because particularly in some of the more so an example would be I sent you that book, The Mind Illuminated. A pretty interesting book. It kind of views the meditation journey as 10 stages, and the 10th one is effectively I'm not 100% sure, but I guess what a lot of people would call or might call awakening or enlightenment or something along those lines. So that's kind of like a it's almost like there's a progression and you're moving towards something. Did you did you think about that idea or that concept of enlightenment as you were going through the journey? Um, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, I think that Soto Zen doesn't talk about enlightenment in quite the same sort of way, um, as a way of emphasizing the present. So it can be, especially in the Western world, especially in the capitalistic world, um, it can be so tempting to get into a spiritual path and to, almost like hold your breath until you like reach your goal. Like I'm going to do all this, intense, fierce monk work, and then one day I will have this like enlightened mind. And Zen actually looks at things more like, um, and this is going to sound really kind of like Zen speak, but it's like you already are enlightened, from day one. There's a veil over that. If you weren't already in an incredible enlightenment in alignment with the universe, you wouldn't even be able to have one moment of consciousness. There's something miraculous happening with you every single moment. You know, the things that we are worried about and torn up about and anxious about and fearful about are the veil that's over us from all the narratives that we have placed upon reality in this moment. And the process of practice is actually unveiling to see the enlightenment that was there all along, to see the connectedness to the universe that was there all along. And that the pathway, um, stage one, stage three, stage 10, whatever, the person should be just as encouraged and just as enthused to be in that stage rather than one day I will have an aha moment and the sun will like shine upon me and that will be the moment. It's almost like at some point you might really have an enlightened moment and that's great. You might be aware of it, or you might just see it in your rearview mirror and you don't know when you left Kansas, but you just know things are vastly different than they used to be. And, they call Soto Zen farmer Zen because it's more like, you don't actually see the crops growing. Maybe on a time lapse photograph you do, but but it is growing in fits and jumps, and you are walking in the middle of mist, and you are getting soaked, and you are getting enlightened, but you don't realize it. And if you stop in each moment and try to like focus and analyze, like, am I more enlightened than I was a month ago? Then you're going to really be ruining the process. And so I think that's why they don't talk about it so much in Zen. But it's not that it's not important. It's as a concept, enlightenment would be the realization of a harmony of the whole universe. and your no, you are not separate from that, you know. And so Zen starts off from the place that you're already there, and all these delusions that you have, and concepts and constructs and things that you're holding on to, out of fear, defensiveness, self-preservation, ego. Those are the things that are keeping us from seeing the enlightenment that exists, rather than it being like a weightlifter that one day wants to bench press 500 pounds, and then finally they get to the goal and now we bench press 500 pounds. And I think sometimes enlightenment is viewed that way. But in Buddhism, it's really, especially in Soto Zen, it's really more a matter of you already are enlightened and let's unveil that step by step.
Huh. It's actually that is very interesting. So how do your how have your kind of if you look at Michael as Zen priest in year one, and now you've been a Zen priest for 14 years, 13 years,
Oh no, no, I got ordained 7 years ago.
ordained 7 years ago. So
Yeah.
before that, you were, is it like an apprentice sort of thing?
Yeah,
Because
I
you were
was
still,
just a, well, I mean, I would call anyone a monk, a person who lives in a monastery by monastic rules, So, I moved in as a monastic in 2009. I started studying Zen in 2007. And, so for the last 12 years, I've lived residentially as a monk. And 7 of those years, I've also been a priest. There's in Soto Zen, you sew a rakusu, which is a little kind of bib that is basically it's five overlapping panels that represent rice paddies in China, and they're overlapped in a way that if you pour water on one end, they would, with gravity, run through all five different fields and then out the other side and water all of the seeds in between. And so when people take the vows of Buddhism, that's not being a priest. That's basically um, taking the initial. It's kind of like being baptized in the Christian faith, where you look at the Ten Commandments in the Bible and say, "Yes, I will live by these." And so you have the different intentions, the Buddhist vows, and people take those. I took those in 2011, after I had been here for 2 years, and I sewed a rakusu. But that's not priest ordination. Priest ordination is where you basically say that not only am I going to live by these vows, but I'm actually going to dedicate my life to helping other people understand the value of these vows and how to integrate them into their lives. And so then that was 3 years after that in 2014 when I actually sewed another rakusu and also sewed an entire, I guess you'd say, sitting robe by hand, which is part of our tradition, is a meditation by sewing. So over the course of a year, I sewed a 14,000 stitch robe with saying, I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha with each stitch. And you do that with no sewing machine. You have to use needle and thread. And you have to do a specific stitch, and it has to be a specific, like, it has to be really close together. And the bigger you are, the bigger your robe is. So you have to sew even longer. I always joke that the people that are 5'2" just don't have the same dedication to this path as I do. But and then you have to also have to sew a bowing mat, which is called a zagu. And yeah, so when that's done, then you present that to your teacher. Your teacher actually gives you a name, a Buddhist name that has to do with your path, and they write that in Japanese kanji on the back of a piece of silk on the back of your robe, and they hand it back to you in a ceremony called Shukkei Tokudo, which is where you formally, in front of friends, family, and the Sangha, um, commit your life to being a Buddhist priest. And the name that I was given was Sozan Koki, which means ancestral mountain vast function. And that is my Dharma name, as we call it. So
how did they decide on that name?
I don't know. Your teacher just decides it, and I haven't ever given someone a Dharma name yet. You can't actually even have students officially until you have been the head monk of a practice period. And I was not head monk of a practice period. Usually, it's about 5 years after you ordain that they let you be head monk. Typically, before then, you're doing a lot of ceremonies and leading, doing different things in the temple, but not actually working one on one with students. So, in about 2 years ago, in almost exactly 2 years ago, I completed being head monk at City Center and started working with students. And then, if I ever have a student that ordains or takes the Buddhist vows, I would talk them through that process. And that's when I probably learn about how they come up with the names. So, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Is there anything now? So between 2011 and now, when you first started being, I guess, a full time monk, to now where you've been there for quite a while, is there anything that stands out to you about like Michael, who was still familiar or had spent time volunteering and meditating and interacting with the Zen Center, and then just making the decision to go, commit all of your time to it, to now? Is there anything at all that stands out about that period or just before and after?
Um, so like the period of time before I was, you're talking about like before I was a priest and then after I was a priest, is that?
Because I guess you were a monk still for a couple of years before you were a priest, right? Where you'd
Yeah,
committed with the kind of the lay vows. So
yeah.
yeah, basically that period. So I guess 10-ish years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so gradual. It's really hard to even think about it in stages. Um, I think that ordaining as a priest in 2014, about 7 years ago, that was unique. There was something about saying I'm dedicating my life to this that felt, yeah, something felt different afterward. Um, it's like it's one thing to live with someone, it's another thing to say we're going to get married in front of everybody and say that, I'm committing to this person for my life. There's some sort of gravity that takes place with that, and I think it's great. Um, you know, it really it does something around deepening the commitment, and it made it easier to do this practice in some way. Um, you know, but as far as the rest of that, as far as stages, I mean, it was just so gradual, you know, that, one week rolled into the next month, that rolled into the next year, that just kind of, and I mean, it still astounds me that I spent 6 years and 4 months living in that monastery, off the grid up in the mountains. Um, if I would have gone there and, in the first month, you would have told me that I had to stay there for 6 years and 4 months, I wouldn't have made it. I would have been like, oh man, this is daunting. This is getting up at 3:50 in the morning, and and all the stuff you get used to in the modern world, all the creature comforts and what have you, um, and not having really control over your food. You eat oryoki style, whatever shows up, and they put in your bowl. That's what you eat. And the cabin that you get assigned is your cabin. And um, it's yeah, it's just so gradual. And yeah, I don't know if that evades your question, but
No, that
um,
definitely touches on it. The other thing I was going to ask actually is, I think I might have asked you this the first time we chatted, but so uh, so I grew up with Theravada Buddhism for the most part because Sri Lankan family and all that kind of stuff. So in the Zen Center, uh, so even ordained priests are allowed to marry, have relationships, and I think at some point you even mentioned that you guys had like Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu or something along those lines as well. So can you talk a little bit about that? Just the lifestyle of a monk, like what's off limits, what's not, what's
Yeah,
expected of you.
right. Well, I can honestly say that I think that Soto Zen is something that you know is it tries to realize that to stay alive as a religion, as a way of life, it needs to stay dynamic with what's going on, and to be in touch with what's going on. Um, and keeping in mind about balance. And the Buddha started off with this thing initially with just like asceticism, where he almost died and almost starved himself to death. And some of the stories might be a little hyperbolic, but trying to live off of 1 grain of rice a day and that sort of thing. And there's a certain desperation, I guess you'd say, or almost zealotry that can come out of, being too ascetic. Just, and then there's this other thing that, I don't think that anyone's ever reached, a very enlightened state through pure hedonism either. And so, I mean, I think that what Zen is getting at is trying to have people figure out how to live a healthy, balanced life, and it might seem a little ascetic to people that live in the modern world, but it might not be as ascetic as people think. I mean, I think that, as a manager of a Zen center that has, a website and has, modern tools, we use, Slack, we use Asana for project management. Um, we have, all sorts of, I Zoom at least 3 or 4 times a day in regard to video conferences. And in those video conferences, I share PowerPoints and make, presentations and all that sort of thing. And um, so how do I interact with these tools and um, do it in a way that isn't just, doing a job, but is really Zen practice? And I've got my, you know, um, my Asana right here, and it's with the, so I can video chat with people. But I do the Pomodoro technique where I work for 25 minutes intentionally, and then I take 5 minutes and do something completely different. And I've got a place for my phone, and when I pick up my phone, I try to at least touch it with 2 hands initially. That's what you do in Zen to give honor to like an object and bring your attention to it. And I bought this for my, or maybe I think a friend gave it to me, but it's just like a steel case holder for a phone, and it just sits on my desk like that. And that's the only place it goes when it's on my desk. And I try to respect that technology, and I have a boundary with it. And that boundary is that at 7:30 in the morning, I start seeing texts and I start seeing email. And at 7:30 at night, it shuts off and I can't see texts and email. And I let calls come through because I'm the director of the center, and sometimes I might need to respond if it's an emergency. But people know that if it's after 7:30 at night, they have to phone me. And there has to be some sort of relationship that exists with technology as it unfolds and becomes more and more daunting to to keep your sanity in the middle of it. And so I think that the modern Zen priest is going to be talking to people that are in the midst of, technological overload. And they've got their Fire TV stick, and they've got their Amazon Prime and their Hulu and all these different things. And some of those things can be awesome, but it's just like, trying to wash dishes. If you put, half a box of detergent in the dishwasher, it's not actually helping clean the dishes anymore. And so people have to look at the body of work. What makes up my life? And am I overwhelmed? Am I overloaded? So I think Hulu's just fine. and Amazon Prime is just fine, and Netflix is just fine. But if you subscribe to every single service out there, and Apple Plus, and Sundance, and and you're constantly getting messages from these things and managing all the different relationships and making sure you're paying for it, and did you get the right deal, and get this special over here, and blah, whatever. And then now they're sending you, they profiled you, and they know all the stuff that you're interested in on the AMC channel. And it's just like, wow, that could become like your whole life, this whole media blitz. And so, is there ever a day in the month where I don't actually interact with technology? Ever? And if I do I go through withdrawal symptoms? That might be a sign of where I'm at. Can I put down my phone for 4 hours and not look at it ever, while I'm awake? And I think that, can I have a zone in my where I live that is a technology-free zone? Can I say that, my bedroom, there's no TV, there's no phone, there's no Asana, there's no whatever, there's just like a bed, or do I feel, and can I ever do one thing at a time? I know people that haven't ever just had a meal and only eaten for years. you know, Sit down and just eat. Me and whatever it is that I enjoy. I enjoy pizza. And so I sit down, and can I just enjoy my pizza, or do I have to enjoy my pizza and be like checking my phone and have the music on and have the TV on and have whatever else going on, or streaming something on YouTube. It's like, so the principles of the Zen practice, it's almost like if I went into my apartment and I didn't have anything to do with technology, and I didn't have anything to do with modern media, and if I didn't have anything to do with social media, and if I just came home and had like this spare apartment with a bed, and I ate all my meals out of like a bowl, and I didn't use anything but just like very base ingredients, vegetables, tofu, rice, chopsticks, a bowl, and just what made things like super stereotypical monkish. I don't know how much I would relate to the students, you know. Um, and different religious practices. I think of the Mennonites. I think of the Amish. There are people who have at some point in time drawn a line in the sand and said, "Okay, no further." We're whatever advances happen in engineering and technology and whatever, no further. But I think that would limit my ability to actually talk to people when they, I talked to a person after a talk I gave at a tech company a couple of years ago about, relationships with technology and setting boundaries. And she literally, this is true. She came up to me and said that, the first step she was going to do was that she was going to stop watching Netflix in the shower. And I was like, I never even thought of that. But, she had her, iPad, stuck to the wall with a waterproof thing that apparently you can buy to, have your iPad in the shower. And she would be in there watching the Kardashians or whatever, and that was like, and but, because I do have, I think currently I have a subscription to Amazon Prime, Netflix, and the Sundance channel or something like that. I alternate them. Sometimes I have Sling because I want to watch like the Super Bowl or whatever, but yeah, so I generally know what's out there. I have a Twitter account, I have an Instagram account, I have a Facebook page. And for anybody out there that's watching this and you want to look up Michael McCord on Facebook, I am doing a fundraiser right now for Zen Center. So you can check out the Zenathon on my Facebook page. But those sorts of things, I think, are where a lot of people are living. And it would be really hard for me to relate to what people are talking about. I could talk about basic Zen principles, but to tell them how I relate those Zen principles to using my iPhone, that would be hard if I just said, okay, I'm not going to do the mobile phone thing. I'm a monk, and if you want to reach me, write me a snail mail letter or whatever. And I don't know that there'd be necessarily something wrong with it, but that's the way that I view it as a Zen priest and how it, I guess you'd say, manifests in my life. And um, yeah, I think that um, that's where people are living, and I want to meet them there.
Do you have uh, any generalized advice you could give to the just the everyday person on how to manage that relationship with technology? So my personal experience with this is that it seems like this age is kind of it's one of the characteristics where people feel bombarded, and there's a bunch of good books on like the attention economy and how all of these companies are competing for the 24 hours that you have in your day, whether that's through video games or Netflix or social media or something else. And then that seems to be against a backdrop of people seem to be a little bit more isolated, where there's less community in the country or in the world, less religion, all of that kind of stuff. So it seems pretty normal now to look at your screen time on your phone and see maybe 3-4 hours. I would assume the average is somewhere probably around there, not including everything people are doing with their computers. And I know that on some level, basically everyone I know complains about this or feels like they don't have the uh, grasp on their relationship with technology that they'd like, but they don't know what to do about it. Do you have any thoughts on the application of Zen or anything you've learned to dealing with this particular problem?
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting. I gave a whole talk about this at the Austin Zen Center back in 2019 in January. You can still find it on their website. Um, and I think that you have to look at technology as a relationship, and any relationship that you have, whether it be with family members or at work or a romantic relationship, if you don't pay attention to what's happening in that relationship and you don't set appropriate boundaries, the relationship will just go off the rails. And a lot of, I think, times we underestimate the power and this the gravity of what the tools that we're engaging with actually have in them. And I think that um, I tell people to start off with an inventory, and to look at what machines are they interacting with, and to look at the applications in those machines and how they're and just to kind of lay out the landscape of what are we talking about, Um, I mean, I've got this pen here that is a part of my, technology relationship, and it's one of these smart pens that, if I put it on the screen of my iPad, or actually it's a Microsoft Surface Pro, it'll I click, it'll do one thing, and it'll do all. I mean, this thing is like amazing, and I've got my mobile phone, and I've got this earpiece that I'm using from Logitech, and it's amazing. All the little tiny buttons that go all along here, and I can tell it to call people, and it'll call people, and it'll do different things to record conversations, and it will do things for. I mean, it's really quite interesting with um, what happens, and so taking that inventory, I've got, my Alexa on my desk that has a camera, and I've got three of them in my apartment that control the lights and the sound and the TV and all that sort of thing. And I walk into my kitchen and I say, I ask it to play, NPR news, and then I start making dinner. And then I forget like how long I'm supposed to actually boil Brussels sprouts, and I'll say, "Give me a recipe for Brussels sprouts." And so, realizing the scope and to think through your day, all the different ways that you use technology, and to do an inventory. And that's where you start, is your inventory. And then from there, start to think about, the ways in which things are obtuse. For instance, one of the best things, one of the more tangible things you can do is look at your mobile phone and to look at all the applications that you don't actually know how to use. Oftentimes, you'll kind of know how to use an application, and you can fumble your way through it. But most applications, people know how to use less than 5%. They just know how to do just a little bit with it. And there's you can make a rule that if you're going to add something to your phone, you have to set aside, 20 minutes to learn how to use it, you know, and to really know how to use it. And we can get frustrated with just the inundation of all the different options. And so I usually tell people to hone like what it is that's actually on your phone that catches your eye with all the little tiny widgets. Those widgets, all those little icons on your phone are designed to grab your attention and make you want to click on them. And to take off, when I did it in my first inventory, I took off probably 60% of the applications off of my phone. I realized that they really weren't that necessary. And then to start to learn how to use the ones that are there. And then I think that thinking about whether or not there are spaces where you just don't have technology. You know, I tell people to start with the bedroom, just experiment. Never let your phone go into your bedroom. And to see what it's like to actually, you can get a basic alarm clock. You don't have to get all the different things that the phone can do. Now, if you've honed things and you're really disciplined, then maybe bring your mobile phone into your room and let it be your alarm clock. But it's so tempting, even in the middle of the night, if you can't sleep, to just roll over and well, I'm going to surf a little bit, or I'm going to look up this and such, or whatever. And it's a very, very powerful machine. And to have it right there next to your bed, not a good thing for most people. Not until you've really built a habit around, how to have a relationship with your phone. And then I think that, oh, and I also have a watch. I have an Apple Watch that's connected to my phone. And, what's my relationship with that? The first thing I did was I realized I don't know anything about an Apple Watch, and it kept like doing that. What's that thing that does the haptics on my wrist? I kept feeling it like tell me stuff. It kept telling me to do things. So the first thing I did with my watch is I made it stop telling me anything. It couldn't even tell me I had an email. I was like, until I know how I want you to come to me, I'm just going to go to you. So at first, now my watch actually tells me to do a few things. But I mean, it was a process because when you buy it, it's basically telling you stuff all the time. And I'm like, no, I don't need to know. I've already got enough reminders. So I mean, it was telling me to breathe. It had that little breathe thing that comes up, and it's just like that's like an automatic install. Tell me to breathe. And I was like, what? It is telling me to stand. It's like time to stand. And I'm like, I don't want you to tell me. And it really felt like I needed to have so I made it stop telling me anything. And now I actually let it tell me to stand because I realized that's a good thing. I like the stand thing. I've been sitting at my desk too long. That's good. I don't need it to tell me to breathe. I still don't let it tell me to breathe. And there's a lot of different things, but just I have a relationship with my watch now that works. And I resisted getting the watch for at least 3 years. I thought about it off and on, and I was just like, nah, too much technology. I got to learn how to use the stuff I have right now. But once I had a good relationship with my phone, then I got the watch. And but I don't still. It's an ongoing. It's an ongoing relationship. I've not done the streaming services with music. I still do music pretty much the old way. I will tell any stuff that's free and I want to hear it. I'll say, Alexa, play. Wait a second, Alexa's starting to listen to me now. I can't say that because it'll happen. But I'll tell it to play the latest song by Dua Lipa or whatever, and then but in regard to my library collection, that can get infinite. It can just suck you into like building all these different playlists and all that. I don't know that I have the time to really control that. So, I just don't do it. And I don't have a subscription to Spotify or to anything like that yet. One day I probably will make the time, but until I know I have the time to set that up and to do it in a way that actually will work for me, I'm just not going to do it. And so I think that, those sorts of things have to happen. And then after you do your inventory and then you start setting your relationships, you set your relationship with each object and your relationship with each application. Then I think you have to figure out when am I going to have some downtime, some me time. So if you have let's say if I had a girlfriend or a wife, you know, everybody knows one of the best things you can do for your relationship is to spend a day or two a month apart at least, where you just don't see each other. I mean, you can get sick of anybody as much as you like them. And it's great to just get away from that person for 24, 48 hours and not, be with them. And the same thing goes for these relationships. I think it's great to, for all the goals that my watch has for me to do, for all the steps I need to take each day, I take it off and just don't have it with me. I completely turn my phone off sometimes for an entire Sunday, you know. I'll let it ring like old school if somebody has an emergency, but other than that, every single bit of it is off, you know, and no internet, and to see what that does, it's hard to even know what your relationship is with an object until you step away from it for a period of time, you know, and and the same thing goes for like a romantic relationship. You get away for a week, on a trip or whatever, and it resets something. You come back to the relationship and you see it a little bit differently. And so I try to sit for an entire day at least once a month. I try to do a 1 day sit where it starts like Friday night at 7:30 and it goes until like Saturday night at like 6 or something. And I'll sit for maybe 2 hours on Friday night, and then I'll sit most of the day on Saturday for in like 30 to 35 minute increments with 5 minutes of walking meditation in between, and maybe an hour for breakfast and an hour for lunch, and no technology. And I think that those sort of things are really powerful to even understanding what your relationship is.
Do you think about so and another part of this is you actually give talks to tech companies. I'm not sure if it's about this, but you do give talks to tech companies in and around this area, right? Zen applications to
Oh yeah,
business.
it's
Yeah.
almost what I just gave you is probably 10 minutes of an hour long talk that I give at tech companies. Yeah.
So how did you start doing that? Is that a more recent thing that you started doing, or and how often do you do that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that they started something here that you've attended before. It's at San Francisco Zen Center called Young Urban Zen, and a lot of people at Young Urban Zen are somewhere typically between ages 25 and 40 that, or maybe like 22 and 40 that have um, kind of gotten out of college, gotten their first tech job, and kind of said to themselves, "Wait a second, there's got to be more to life," and are asking some bigger questions. And so there's a lot of folks, of course, here with our demographic in Silicon Valley and San Francisco is tech heavy, and a lot of folks that attend Young Urban Zen, are in that field. And I've connected with a lot of people in that group. In fact, I think every student I've worked with has pretty much come through that group at some point in time, as far as just people that relate to me and I relate to them. And that's where a lot of those connections happened in regard to talking at tech companies. Was people saying, hey, me and my coworkers and can you come and we do this thing every Friday afternoon. I went to Thumbtack, for instance, and they have a thing, or they had a thing. I don't know how they're doing during COVID, but they had a thing where every Friday at 3, they would have a seminar from somebody in some field for free that would come in and do a presentation, on whatever. So yeah, I came in and talked to a whole bunch of folks. I did that at Stitch Fix. I did it at IDEO, just different places where you're talking, and it's amazing. I'll go in and there'd be like 50 people sitting there that are engineers, and after we spend an hour together, like the head of HR will come up to me and go, "I have never seen any time that we got 50 people in this company together in a room not looking at their phones, you know. But we set the bar just like at the very beginning. It's like, if you want to look at your technology during this presentation, go outside, you know. And while you're in the room and you want to look at it, just notice what that feels like, you know. But yeah, I think there's a hunger and a thirst, and I haven't had a lot of people in these presentations looking at their technology. There's a real desire to to ask the question, how can I be with this job that seems impossible and actually use some Zen principles? Are those things diametrically opposed, or can I actually be a person, neck deep in machine learning for 15 hours a day and still, be using Zen principles? Is that possible? And the answer is definitely. But the ways to do it are not intuitive, and they might seem counterproductive. But I did have one person come back to me 6 months later and tell me that something that, well, I was talking about the Pomodoro technique earlier. I told them, this is someone who's basically doing um, programming all day long, and you know, time is always of the essence. And how fast can you type, and how fast can you logically work through the different scenarios and problems, and come up, and it's like once you get rolling, you don't want to stop. You want to keep the train of thought moving. And I said, well, if you did that for 25 minutes with a clear intention, and then you stopped for 5 minutes and then came back to it, I think that it would still work even in your job. And he said, it seemed like I would lose my train of thought. And but he tried it and found out that, he said, I get less done over the course of an hour, but I get more done over the course of 16 hours. And I think that he noticed that he actually could keep working longer, and his attention span, in hour 6 and hour 8 was way better than it was, and memory was improved, and his eyesight, his eye strain was improved, and all so many things just made it easier to actually do the job, that was maybe difficult to see if you just did a 1 hour test.
And I know we've touched on this a little bit, but do you think about, so I guess what's unique about your position is you're an ordained Zen priest, but um, I'm sure probably most of the people, if not all of the folks that watch this, will never have um, met or heard of a monk that has three Alexas and worked in technology and has the devices and has a good understanding of that. That to me, that's always felt like a pretty unique thing. So do you, um, in addition to the talks, is there anything do you have any ideas about potentially uh, pushing more of this kind of stuff into the world? I know we've talked about a few things, including maybe executive coaching or a podcast or different things. But have you had any thoughts on potentially continuing this line of thought in different ways?
Yeah. Well, I will mention that, although it might not be as common, in the last 5 to 10 years, I think there's been more priests like me emerging. And I can think of others that I've trained that are living here at Zen Center now that do a lot of very similar things. And Dan Zigmund, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's worked in very senior positions at Facebook and at Google, and he's currently on the board of Zen Center, and he's an ordained priest who doesn't live here in residence, but still, I think he still works at Facebook. No, I think it's at Google. Anyway, I forget where he's at, but he wrote a book last year about Zen principles in the technology field. The original book was by Les Kay in the late 70s, who was an IBM executive, who was a student of Suzuki Roshi's, and founded the Kannon Do Sangha, which is in Silicon Valley. and is still vibrant and thriving, and he's still running that Sangha. And he never quit being an IBM executive for 30 years, and now is retired. And he wrote Zen at Work back in the late 70s. Um, ZBA, written by Mark Lesser, Zen Business Administration.
Hmm.
He was one of the co-founders of Search Inside Yourself, which initially started at Google, and he went there as a Zen priest, basically teaching Zen principles, but not talking about Zen, just talking about the principles. So it felt more like outside of religion, and it became the most famous or the most popular, extracurricular, I guess you'd say, seminar to attend at Google. And then he took that further than Google and founded this organization now that is worldwide called Search Inside Yourself. And it's essentially what they do is they go into tech corporations and they talk about using Zen principles in the workforce. But they don't talk about Buddhism. They just talk about the principles. And then Mark left Search Inside Yourself, and he founded another company now that's Mark Lesser Associates that does essentially that, and it's executive coaching for people that are tech executives. And Mark Lesser is my personal coach, and I work with him once a month. So this is emerging. There are people out there that are starting to do it. And I've considered doing a podcast myself and doing some other things in the future. I feel like I want to do it one step at a time because these things can be overwhelming, and I would have to, cut something out of my life in order to make time to do something like that. And right now, my plate's pretty full, but I think that's the direction a lot of things I'm working on are heading because there's just such a thirst for it, and I think that the that marriage between Zen principles and where people are living and working is just so relevant today.
Got it. Okay. Hmm. Michael, so I think I basically ran through most of the things I had on my mind to ask you about. Is there anything else that we talked about or anything else that comes to mind that you wanted to maybe dig into more?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that some of the ways that are really great for people. We have people come here as guest students and do a stint, and then go back to the tech field. We had three people last year come here that were full on working in the tech field, and then came to City Center and did a 1 year stint as a guest student. Typically, students do 2 years, but I think that setting yourself up for a career, it can be great to go and even just do a practice period. Do a sabbatical for 3 months and go to Tassajara and do a practice period, or do an online practice period at Zen Center, or just join online Zazen in the morning. We do 1 day sits online where you can join the 1 day sit and do it in your apartment. So there's a lot of things that are available for getting in and figuring out how some of these things might relate to a person's life. And I would just encourage people to, not feel like they have to be a full-on monk that, now is completely ascetic and only eats, rice without salt and doesn't have Netflix. There can be a life that you really enjoy, but using some of the Zen principles can help that life be less anxious, less worried, and more centered, and really better able to show up for your life. And hopefully, some of these things that are made available that people can tap into. If you go to sfzc.org, which is San Francisco Zen Center.org, sfzc.org, you can see all the different ways that you can connect to the offerings and Dharma talks and things like that. You can see my previous talks on technology that are on that website. But yeah, I think the main thing is just to encourage people to learn how to be kind to themselves.
And along with that, I think when we release this episode, I'll summarize a bunch of the resources on SFZC and get your input as well on anything else we should share with the folks. But aside from that, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm sure a lot of other folks will appreciate it as well. And I hope you have an awesome day.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you, Tanika. Take care.